How do we treat an air embolism? How does Killer Queen cause its victims to internally combust? And which of all of these different injuries are more likely to be fatal? Hi and welcome back to doc.offcall, where today we're going to be taking another look at JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, specifically Diamond is Unbreakable. Now, I have a few more JoJo videos in the pipeline, so make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on those ones. Otherwise, if you're ready for a breakdown of JoJo injuries, let's begin.
Oi, senpai. Anta, ima ore no kono atama no koto nan tsutta?
Okay, so first up we got a nasal fracture and the loss of several teeth. And interestingly, when you're talking about a broken nose, you're actually talking about breaking the upper part of the nose, which is actually bone, rather than the lower part, which is all just cartilage. And also, this guy is definitely over the age of 12, and so he would have lost his milk teeth. So unless he wants to look like this forever, he better get to a dentist. Gosh, without having watched JoJo for a while, you forget how violent it actually is. So this guy's definitely got some oral trauma, as well as bilateral eardrum perforation, where his eardrums have basically ruptured. However, he could actually survive this if we take a closer look at the stan's passage through his body. So we see the stab enter his mouth, and then it can access his eustachian tubes through his nose, allowing him then to bust out of his eardrums like we see here. So if it's just these structures that have been damaged, he could well come out surviving this. So this death is a little bit different to the one we've seen before, as the Gramps also seems to be bleeding both out of his eyes and his ears. It's more likely in this scenario that he ended up drinking the alcohol, which went straight to his stomach and was rapidly absorbed into his bloodstream. This would allow the Stan to use his blood vessels as a highway system to travel around the body, causing damage. It then looks like the Stan tried exiting the blood vessels through the quickest route possible, which would be in the capillaries found in your eyes, ears, nose and throat. A horrible way to go, isn't it? Oh gosh, you know, Koichi's probably the most beat upon character in this season. And to kick it off, he's getting his neck trapped in this vice-like position. And the obvious types of injuries we'd be looking at here are either going to be a subluxation, whereby the vertebral bodies are separated from one another, or a complete fracture of one of the vertebral bones. And of course, a fracture at this level would likely cause damage to the underlying spinal cord, leaving Koichi paralysed. Oh god, an arrow to the throat. Koichi can't catch a break. But I have to admit, that's pretty good aim, as it looks like it's hit him right in the jugular notch. But do I think this is life-threatening? Well, yes, definitely. Just below this landmark, you actually find the trachea, otherwise known as the windpipe, and therefore taking an arrow to this area is cutting off your ability to breathe. Interestingly though, this area is quite close to the part of the neck where you perform an urgent cricothyroidotomy, which is what you see in the movies where they put a biro into someone's neck to open up their airway. Of course, needless to say, don't try this at home. You know, this is the exact reason why your mum tells you not to play with a nail or a staple gun. But you know, this kind of reminds me of an X-ray that I've seen where a patient actually got shot in the head with multiple nails from a nail gun and somehow he survived it. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure how he did, considering the amount of nails he had in his brain. But then again, the brain is a very mysterious organ that we don't fully understand. No, I really love this guy's stand, having a little military to defend himself. It kind of reminded me of that film Toy Soldiers, if you've ever seen it. But nonetheless, answering the important questions, what sort of damage would a missile to the eye inflict? Well, we could really be looking at a wide range of injuries, anything from a globe rupture all the way to a fracture of the eye socket, otherwise known as the orbit. We might even be looking at an element of brain damage, which could ultimately be life-threatening. It will really just come down to the impact force of this missile, as I've seen pretty serious eye injuries come from the most benign and harmless objects. So this is clearly a fatal injury. A fist through the abdomen would rupture your abdominal aorta, which carries the majority of your blood supply. It wouldn't take long for you to bleed to death. I guess you could make the argument that the electricity from this stand would also be cauterizing the wound as it was doing damage to his body, and that the electricity would prevent his heart from actually going into cardiac arrest, almost acting like a defibrillator. But once he pulls out of this character, he's ultimately going to be a goner. Yeah, so we actually know quite a lot about the gruesome dying process of being electrocuted, and a lot of this information has been gathered through the execution of people on death row in the US. We can see that he's been burnt black, which tells me he's got 4th degree burns, which is where the skin has been completely burnt down to the bone, hence why it's charred. Another horrifying detail of this death is you can see steam coming off of his body as well as out of his mouth, which tells us that the electricity was burning at such a heat that it caused both his blood and his internal organs to boil. Gosh, not Koichi's neck again. This time round you can really hear the crunching coming from his neck as the bones begin to break. Also, I would suspect that from an injury like this, that he could well have crushed his trachea. I think just as a precaution, Koichi might benefit from wearing a protective neck brace to prevent any future injuries like this. Oh god, I just can't stand injuries to the eye. There's something about the jelly-like consistency of it. But fortunately, there are some doctors out there who love repairing injuries like this, and so long as the other structures in the eye, such as the lens and the retina, are undamaged, you could well restore the eye back to its previous inflated structure. I'm just not sure what we'd do about that ink poisoning that Josuke would have gotten from the pen. Okay, so we've looked at a few arm amputations in different anime shows, but this one looks pretty clean and it also looks like it's below the elbow, which might make it easier to reattach. But guys, can you remember how quickly you need to get to a surgeon to allow this to be reattached? For argument's sake, let's say you've cooled it and put it on some ice. I'll give you 3 options. Is it 4 hours, 12 hours, or 24 hours? Let me know down below. Oh gosh, a pinky fracture. I can definitely feel his pain, having done something like this back in my youth whilst trying to skateboard. But with the way that bone is all twisted and contorted, you'd not only be worried about fractures, but also damage to the tendons that allow you to bend your finger. And so I suspect he's going to need surgery to pin the bone to allow it all to heal straight. Not to mention all of the other repair work that he might need done on that tendon to allow him to bend his pinky, and I presume play more guitar. Ah, so in this version, they blacked out all of the goriness, I guess to spare the viewer's stomach. But in the original version, that hand looked far more gammy. But it looks like these rats' darts contain some form of poison or venom that induces tissue necrosis or decomposition. And horrifyingly enough, there are actually species of snakes such as pit vipers and even spiders such as the brown recluse spider that produce this form of venom. Granted, it doesn't work as quickly as this rat's, but the effects are as gory. Gosh, I've seen some people come to my clinic with itching like this, and sometimes it's to the point where they've scratched off their skin. And one thing that you've always got to keep in mind is whether they're suffering from some form of infestation, such as scabies. Now, scabies is a condition that's caused by a microscopic mite that burrows itself into your skin, causing a chemical reaction that results in intense itching, which is often found in your hands, wrists and feet. And just to be aware that this mite can actually infest your bedding, clothes and towels, making it very difficult to eradicate, so just make sure you don't share these items with anyone else. I like how this character went from being so innocent and harmless to being a real formidable foe for Josuke, and it's actually pretty sly here that he's injected alcohol into their veins. And the thing to remember about alcohol is that it's a central nervous system depressant, and so if you're injecting it directly into the bloodstream, it can actually bypass your body's ability to detoxifying it, leading to acute alcohol poisoning. And this can manifest with you feeling mal-coordinated, confused and falling over, a bit like how Josuke is looking in this scene. Oh god, a torn eyelid. That is horrible. But fortunately for me, they've blacked out any of that gore. And the thing to remember about the eyelid is that it serves multiple purposes. One in protecting the eye from any foreign bodies or dust, and the other by keeping it wet and moist, rather than getting dried out and irritated. So either Josuke could wear an eye patch whilst this is healing to prevent foreign bodies from going into his eye, or alternatively he could go to an ophthalmologist and maybe get a few stitches. So enter Killer Queen, who I have to say is one of my favourite JoJo stands. We can see how powerful a stand it is by the way it almost blows off Shigeki's face. And if we take a closer look at that injury, we can see that his nasal septum has been completely deviated to one side from the explosive force of Killer Queen's stand. Now, if he's brave enough, he could actually manipulate this himself and realign it back into its normal anatomical position. But most people aren't brave and they come and see us, and we end up performing a nasal surgery to align their nose. And then it also looks like he's got several open lacerations up and down his body, which I suspect is from the shrapnel from that explosion. It looks like he might need a few stitches. So it looks like Shigekko's body has been totally vaporized by the power of Killer Queen, leaving no trace of his body left behind. And this kind of reminds me of when people opt for a cremation as opposed to a burial. But if I remember correctly, the furnace for the crematorium is only around 1,000 degrees, and that's why you end up with the ashes that go in the urn. I believe to totally vaporize a whole human body with nothing remaining, you're going to need to get up to a temperature of around 1,500 degrees Celsius. That's hot. Oh god, he's blown off all of his fingers. This is probably the type of injury you'd expect if a grenade went off in someone's hand, leaving behind only an open bloody stump. And it's unlikely that any corrective surgery will be able to restore the anatomy back to normal. It would almost be like trying to perform a jigsaw with several different pieces missing. So in cases like this, surgeons often perform salvage surgery, where they're basically trying to keep as much functional tissue remaining, even if that means just having 2 fingers left on that stump. Okay, so not only has Jotaro had to deal with the explosive impact of that bomb, but also the penetrating trauma from that surrounding shrapnel. In instances like this, even the most harmless of objects can become weaponized projectiles, causing either blunt force trauma or penetrating trauma to those in the surrounding environment. And it looks like Jotaro's taken some pretty critical shots to the right side of his chest wall. Certainly with penetrating trauma, that could cause your lung to puncture and even collapse. Gosh, once again, Koichi taking a beating here. He's almost become a bit of a punch bag by this point. And clearly being face planted repeatedly into the ground is definitely going to do some trauma to his facial structure, damaging either his facial bones, his teeth, and maybe even his eyes. Also, the blunt acceleration and deceleration forces that occur during a face plant can actually cause a concussive syndrome, leading the brain to swell and possibly contribute to long-term brain damage. So another penetrating chest trauma, but this time it's through Koichi's chest. This would likely rupture the thoracic part of his aorta, penetrate through the heart, collapse the lung, before finally then going through the vertebral column and spinal cord, completely severing it. Now, there are very few injuries that you can look at and say, here, that's an instant fatality, but I think this is definitely one of them. Really, it would be a miracle for anyone to maintain consciousness, let alone survive injuries like this. Okay, so taking a blow to the jaw head-on from Jotaro is pretty much a death sentence, as we see an instant deformity form on that side of his face. Now, this can actually occur after head trauma and can indicate that you've actually sustained a facial bone fracture. And with that hit striking Kira on his jawline, you've got to wonder as to whether he's got a mandibular fracture, which will often need surgery to fix. As a minimum, it's definitely going to stop Kira running his mouth about all the other characters, and at the worst, he might end up having to drink and eat through a straw for a few months. Oh, that's another injury that at least some of you might have experienced, losing a nail off of your toe. It's actually a very common injury that we see in long distance runners. In fact, I've suffered from losing a couple of toenails now and again. The good thing is that they do grow back from the nail bed, however it does take some time, at a rate of about 1mm per month, so you're really looking at about 12 to 18 months for the whole nail to come back. In the meantime, just make sure not to stub your toes. Goodness me, imagine if an awesome character like Kira got taken out of the storyline by this cat. Nonetheless, it almost happened. You see, this air in his vein could travel around the body as an air embolism, and what this does is it effectively blocks different blood vessels depending on where it lands. If it lands in your heart, it could cause a heart attack. If it lands in your lung, it could cause respiratory arrest. And if it lands in your brain, well, you have a stroke. The only real way of treating this, if it is found, is giving people high flow oxygen in a pressurized environment and tipping them upside down and turned on their left side. This should help to prevent it from lodging in your brain or heart. Okay, it looks like this explosive bubble has taken out the whole right side of Okuyasu's abdomen, but is this going to be life-threatening? So to determine this, you really need to think about the underlying structures that might have been damaged, and the best way of doing this is using an anatomical sieve. What this involves is thinking about what you have anatomically in that area from superficial to deep, working from front to back. For example, he's got skin, then muscle, then intestines, then a kidney, then we're really back through the other end. So really, there isn't anything there that would make this immediately life-threatening, resulting in a fatality, as many people live with only one kidney, and certainly other people live with a bit of their bowel removed. Hopefully he doesn't bleed out and survives long enough for Josuke to do his magic. So Killer Queen had already touched and activated those panties as a bomb. This is just another aspect of this stand that makes it so difficult to deal with. Trying not to touch any of its booby traps. But looking at the way that this guy explodes, it makes you think whether Killer Queen is causing you to internally combust. And this makes you wonder whether Killer Queen's power is actually rearranging your internal biochemistry into a chemical structure that would resemble a bomb, which ultimately makes you then explode. A very interesting power if that's how it works. So that's a very clever way of using Josuke's power, having a boomerang-like effect on any thrown projectiles. And I'm not sure if it's intentional, but that piece of glass kind of looks like a heart, meaning that when it strikes Kira, it causes a heart attack. No pun intended. But an injury like this penetrating through into the left side of his chest could actually hit his heart, which would ultimately be fatal. However, knowing how the story goes on, I'm sure he's actually missed this vital structure, but that doesn't mean that he's escaped the lung, which, if punctured, could cause it to collapse, causing a pneumothorax, which could ultimately also be life-threatening, but you wouldn't necessarily die immediately. Goodness me, getting your head rolled under a tyre. I can't think of a more horrific way to go. You basically see the tyre coming at you before it crushes your skull. But let's just say that the tyre doesn't crush your head. The torsion that it would have on your neck would turn it a full 360. Now, putting that level of torsion on your neck would certainly cause your vertebral bodies to completely dislocate from one another, and also tear through your spinal cord, effectively leaving you paralysed. Rest in peace, Kira.
失礼。遺体の身元はわかるかな。
吉良義景と自分で名乗っていました。
Okay, so that's a little bit more gory detail about what actually happened with this injury. He's effectively had his face torn off, which is actually quite ironic, considering that throughout this storyline he was trying to maintain his air of mystery whilst trying to hide his identity. It looks like he's gonna die the same way, faceless, with no one knowing who he truly was. Okay guys, if you want to see more JoJo videos, I'll leave 2 more up here for your viewing pleasure. Otherwise, make sure to look out for my next JoJo videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks.